Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Agronomy Highlights podcast. I will be your host today, Justin Brackenrich, and this is going to be another one of our installments of the state crop condition. Typically, Dwayne Miller would be with me today, but we're powering on in his absence. Summer gets tough for all of us with fairs and festivals and crops, but Dwayne's with us in spirit, and we'll see if we can't keep up our usual banter in Dwayne's absence and make this go smoothly. But as always for these reports, if you remember, we've got myself, I'm representing kind of the Southwest. Dwayne usually does kind of the eastern, central, and eastern northern part. We've got Dr. Heidi Reed with us, and we've got Aaron Kaprinka. Let's start with you, Heidi. Why don't you introduce yourself and say hello?
Hello, everybody. My name's Heidi Reed. I'm based in Lancaster County here, and I guess giving the perspective from the southeastern corner of the state.
Yeah. Aaron?
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Kaprinka. I'm based out of Mercer County and basically the northwest portion of the state.
So if you've been trailing along with us and doing this, we appreciate you. This would be our third kind of installment, and we're trying to keep everything similar, right? We'd like to have the same hosts and the same guests back. And so we've been doing that kind of tracking our growing season throughout the year, talking about what we're seeing that's good, maybe what's bad, and then answering one of the common or two perhaps common questions we've been getting. So let's start with Aaron. Aaron, what's going on in the Mercer and Northwest area the last couple weeks?
There's different things going on right through here. If you're driving on the road, the crops look absolutely amazing. If you've been following along, paying close attention, there are some areas that our producers pushed through that wet portion. We had a couple of wet portion sections and they pushed through that. And because of that, the crops in those fields, we did get adequate rainfall after that. And those fields, I mean, you can see the difference in there. They're just not producing like the other crops were that were planted at the exact perfect time. Although hindsight's 20/20, right? With that being said, when you're driving along the road, they have started to fill in and it looks amazing from the road. However, I am concerned about what kind of crops they are going to get off of there. You know, what kind of whites they're going to get off there, bushels per acre, etc. Other than that, adequate moisture right now in my area. I have a vast area from Erie clear down to Lawrence County. Lawrence County is ahead of everyone else. So right now, that's what I'm focused on is how many bushels per acre they're going to get, because we know with the fertilizer prices and everything, they're going to need to be spot on this year. From the road, though, things look really nice.
Excellent. So we do our sentinel plots. I don't know if anyone listening follows along with those, but every week we're scouting soybeans for disease, for insects, for kind of abiotic factors. Aaron, have you been seeing any disease coming in late season? I know from experiences up there, sometimes you get some disease showing up where it's a little more humid.
Right now, I think things look pretty good. And, you know, I've seen lots of beneficials in the fields, very low disease pressure this year compared to previous years on everything that I've looked at right now.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, the last couple of years we've seen, at least over here, it's been fairly low disease pressure, but it's also been significantly hotter and drier than usual, right? Where I think this year, maybe we're kind of rebounding to more normal. But all right, thanks. Heidi, what do you have for us?
Sure. So even though I am just covering Lancaster County, there's some pretty drastic differences between the southern end and northern end of the county and then on into Lebanon and Burke. So the southern end has been receiving more rain throughout the growing season, and the crops are looking pretty good. Full season soybeans in general are looking fantastic. Since we have been drier, foliar diseases are really, really low levels. If anything, the dry is making pests like grasshoppers a little more prevalent than usual. Some thrips in soybeans. We're out there. However, we've got some relief from rains recently. Double crop soybeans are not looking very good. They're just growing slowly. They're quite short. They've, I guess, only been in the ground a month, but seem like they're a little behind where they would usually be if we had adequate moisture. For corn, we have corn as far along as in the milk stage. And from what I can tell, pollination is looking quite good. We happen to have a spell and I would say cool and dry during the period where early planted corn was pollinating. So that pollen was flying around nice. It wasn't, sticking to the tassel. Adequate pollination occurred. So I think our early planted corn is going to do okay. There's some corn that's just starting to silk now. So I guess time will tell how that corn's going to do. But even if we get good pollination, I am a little worried about yield because of the lack of moisture. We might just have fewer kernels around and shorter ears, I guess, than we would in an average year. So we'll see how those cobs fill out. In terms of foliar diseases, corn is looking like quite good. Low levels of kind of the standard gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight, and tar spot. Nothing crazy that I've seen. So I will say in the northern end of the county where it is dry, before we got this relief of rain here over the last couple of days, stuff was showing some drought stress, so starting to curl up. But it seems like it's doing a little better now. I did also want to note that tobacco is flowering, so tobacco growers are topping and suckering that crop right now. And I think that was all the key points I wanted to hit. I don't have a great insight on hay, grass, and alfalfa hay right now. It seems like harvest timing for that was all over the place this year, just when it happened to be timely for individual growers.
I heard last week from some producers that the corn and beans are doing really well, but now they can't get any hay made, right? And it was the kind of the opposite story of what we heard last year. And my response, well, you just can't say that. Now you're just being greedy, right? Like you can't have it all. You can't make hay all the time and have perfect beans and corn.
That's right. You can have two of the three.
Yeah. So for the Southwest, I'm directly below Aaron. One of the things that I kind of find interesting is if you've been following along, we've been colder than average kind of the entire portion of the year, right? Looking at bushels, or it was old farm logs, we can still track like our growing degree days, our heat units. And we started out much colder, and then we kind of hit that spike. What was that, like late June into early July, that we kind of gained some ground and caught back up. But still, where I'm looking at stuff in Washington County, we're about 3% colder. So something that I don't really see that as that significant, but we're 10% more rain than average. Where we look at something like Fayette County, we're almost 6% under on temperature, but also almost 4% drier, right? So I think I've heard farmers tell me that moisture will cover up a lot of bad farming. And I think maybe that is true sometimes, that rain is kind of been our most limiting factor of the last few years, and it's showing up. Right now, we've got some of the best beans that we've seen in a few years over here. And I think that's largely because of the moisture that we've been getting there, doing really well about waste time, moving into R3, R4. Corn, if it was early planted, I would say it's at the blister stage, maybe kind of moving on. But there is also some of the stuff that got in after rains and things that may be just entering tasseling and silking now. So then that question comes up with those is, what about the heat units, right? How will we close out the year? And will we have enough for those to catch up? We've talked a lot on some of these podcasts about we don't always have to have that exact amount of heat units, right? There's compensation later, but we still have to have something. And I think that is a concern with some of the 50-degree nights that we've been having, is just actually filling bins and filling out bushel. Hay and alfalfa, again, they complain because our first cutting was a little low. I think talking to a lot of producers, and you all jump in here too if you have any other comments, but we seem to be somewhere between 50% to a third less of our first cutting hay than usual. And a lot of that is because of the weather, but also we had some late frosts that may have reset some things. I think the folks that went out after that and fertilized are in a position to make that back up, right? We've had some really nice weather through the summer. We've put on some good grass. A lot of the alfalfa people are probably getting close to starting or maybe done with their third harvest, something we haven't been seeing a lot of. And I think grass hay is also looking really well, right? The thing that comes with 50-degree temperatures is due, and that's been kind of moving us along. So we're thankful for all of that. But overall, I would say these are the best crops we've seen in a while. Aaron, Heidi, anything else on crop conditions?
No, I was just going to say in my neck of the woods, what we lost in yield on first cut, I think it was made up for second cut. So we gained that much more second cut as compared to what we lost. And again, with the moisture, like you said, I do think right now we need some heat. And in terms of moisture, I think that the rain, that any crops that aren't at their prime, in the rain got them into that. And I think the moisture was pulling them back out of that. So it was kind of ironic that way.
One of the things I've been noticing, and Heidi, you might have been dealing with this longer than the rest of us, but we've got kind of an on-surge of water hemp and palmer this year that I've not noticed before. And, I think over the last few years, we've talked a lot about it at pesticide meetings. And I know Dwight and John Wallace have done a tremendous amount of work trying to educate us on this. But now, I guess something's not relevant until it's in your backyard, right? It's the eastern part of the state's problem, or that's Ohio's problem, but now it's starting to be our problem. And so I think one of the things that we'll take away from this season is kind of a big seed bank full of some of these pigweed species that may be something to deal with.
Yeah, I am sorry to hear that. And yes, we have had those species for a couple more years than you have as they moved up from the south on supposedly custom harvesting equipment, but comes down to not relying on Roundup Post as your only form of weed control. And hopefully we can convince folks that a two-pass, like overlapping residual type of program is just part of growing soybeans in areas that have these resistant species, and also spraying timely on label when they're small so that the products can work as designed. If they're estates, they're going to be setting seed here soon. So I know back when Bill Curran, our old extension weed specialist, was still at Penn State, he had printed off a bunch of paper bags with instructions for hand pulling, roguing out those type of, palmer and water hemp, and put them in the bag and dispose of it in the trash so that they don't set seed and don't add to your seed banks. Maybe get your neighbor kid or, pay your little nephew 5 cents a Palmer amaranth and they can have a day of it.
Boy, I've seen some fields. That might be a retirement plan for some people.
I was going to say, you could make a killing up here.
Yeah. Yeah, any young entrepreneurs out there listening to the Agronomy Highlights podcast, you heard it here first, right? You can start your weed pulling business.
I didn't say I was paying, but yeah, set your price accordingly to market needs.
Yeah, so, as we kind of wrap these up, I think I would say by the next one that we look at in early September, I would bet that we'll see areas that have started chopping silage. I would bet that we'll see some areas that'll be talking about burn down and planting cover crop after that. I think the next month is really going to speed up for us in a lot of things. And I think our plan is to run this through September and perhaps even October into when we start talking about corn and soybean harvests. But I do think the next 6 to 8 weeks will be changing a lot of what we're doing right now. We're kind of in this hurry up and wait type situation. There's not a lot we can do with weeds even at this point, or fertility or something like that. Now it's done. Let's see how it comes off, and we start planning for next year. And I'm going to use that to kind of springboard us into our questions, right? This idea of planning for next year. So we got 2 questions. I'm going to throw out the first one, and I'm going to say either one of you that wants to jump in, I'll let you start. What are the steps that you would recommend for a successful fall forage seeding?
Well, I'll jump in here quick because I want to get my 2 cents in before Aaron steals it. But I would say, I guess, first things first, if you don't have a current soil test, take a time machine back a year or 6 months and get one, and then get your soil fertility straight. Because if you are overly acidic, if you need to apply lime, especially a significant amount of lime, if you're trying to come up from a 5.0 or something like that, that's not going to happen in a month before Labor Day when forage seeding should happen. So hopefully you have a current soil test and have your soil fertility taken care of so that you can focus on things like seed bed prep and setting the drill appropriately and things like that for the actual seeding. Aaron?
Yeah. If you're in the northwest corner of Pennsylvania, that's what I was going to start with, soil testing. I've chosen 2 things to talk about this through winter meetings, and everybody that calls, and record keeping and soil testing is one. And so I don't even go any farther before we talk about soil testing. So absolutely, I echo everything that you said there. Another one is, you talked a little bit about prep, but species selection as well. So you want to choose forages that are well adapted to your specific area, your specific soil type, and exactly what you're looking for fall seeding for your area. What are your goals for that? I always think that it's kind of like a puzzle, just like anything else that you're doing. Farming is kind of like a puzzle to see how it all works out. And that's a piece to the puzzle. Justin, I'll let you get started and then we'll finish.
So Heidi said one of the things that I typically say is Labor Day, right? And my opinion of that is, like, we need 6 to 8 weeks before frost. If I tell them Labor Day, they're going to wait 2 weeks before they do it. So then it happens in the middle of September. And so then we have to the end of October, right? Depending on where I'm talking to someone about that deadline, it moves, right? If you're in the northern tier, that might be August. If you're in Heidi's area, heck, it could be, mid to late September, because you may not see that killing frost. But no matter where they are, I embellish my answer by 2 weeks because I know they're going to always push the envelope, right? And that always happens. And sometimes we get away with it, right? Sometimes that frost doesn't come until December. And we're not talking about 32 degrees. We're talking about 27 or 25 of like a sustained temperature, right? This is not the little frost that you may see. This is something to actually kill them. And sometimes it's later until we see that, depending on the area. And maybe you get away with it. Maybe next year it happens on Halloween, right? So I think those are all things to keep in perspective of, your climate and your area way better than we do, right? And so often that advice is plan accordingly 6 to 8 weeks prior to frost. One of the other big ones I push is, Heidi also said this. She teed me up very well. I think forage seedings are like a long-term investment, right? If you're row cropping and you're going to do it for 50 years, you got 50 tries to get it right. Ideally, if we're doing forages, we're not reseeding every year, right? So hopefully we've got maybe 25 or 30 chances to get this right if we're doing these things differently. So I think what she mentioned about go back in time a year, start testing your soil a year ahead of time. I think it's really important if you're going out of a row crop or you're changing hands on the property, know what herbicide was used, because that can dictate this fall seeding versus spring seeding, or perhaps it means no seeding at all, depending on what treatments were used on the row crop. So I think that's really important. If you're going to do a burn down or something prior to seeding and no-till, I would encourage you to look at this week's Field Crop News. Dwight Lingenfelter has an article in there on herbicide options for forages and withdrawal periods, and understand that we're talking about a very small seed planted very shallow, and that changes a lot compared to perhaps corn that might be at 1.5 inches or 2 inches or something like that. It really changes some of the herbicides and the way they will affect that seed. But otherwise, I think we kind of got most of my tips that I would bring out. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that if this is for pasture, not for hay, having a plan for if you have animals on your property now, having a plan for what to do with them while this new seeding is establishing. You should not count on being able to put the animals out if it is a cool season perennial seeding until middle of next summer. Justin, what do you like to see in terms of, as long as possible, ideally, so that grass can get established well. But time and again, especially it tends to happen with hobbyists or, equine folks, like want to plant a field in September and then put the horses out by March or April, and it just is not a realistic plan. So having an idea of what to do, if it's a heavy use area, a dry lot, something like that, keep them in stalls, keep them in the barn, whatever. Maybe less of an issue with more experienced pasture folks, but I wanted to put it out.
No, I think it definitely should be. And you're right. That's when our seedings don't work. It's not usually the seed's fault. And we've talked about this with corn or beans or something like that. When we're talking about seeding something, was it too wet when we seeded? Was it too dry? Did it get too cold too fast? Did we mow or harvest before it was ready? Right. That's maybe another question we can have is what's common in your areas. Are they fall or spring seeded? Right. And I think that fall seeding gives you a lot more flexibility than what the spring or summertime seeding does, right? Because now if we're out in September, we make it through the winter, ideally by late May, early June with a gentle graze or something like that, we're going to know that this is going to stand. If we've started this in April, now we're talking probably July or August, right? We may be looking at a fall grazing before we can do that. But what is most common practice in your all's area?
People aim for fall and often end up in spring.
That's great. Yeah.
I was going to say ditto. Intentions or what's actually done. But yes, hopefully they plan for the fall. But yes, they're usually calling in the spring going, what do I do now? It's too wet. I can't get onto the fields. Exactly what Heidi said.
And I think, again, like the more we talk about this, the more it brings stuff up. And this is a reminder of we're sitting here early August planning this. If you're shooting for September, like it's not too early to order seed, right? Like, or if you're renting a county drill or whatever that may be, now is the time that you need to be thinking about that so that stuff can be delivered. It can be ordered. You can get put on the list because you're not the only person wanting to do this in early September.
Right. And then it's like, well, what if we get a couple days of rain and the soil's not fit to be on the field? And I mean, I should take my own advice, but hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Procrastinating on this is not going to set you up for success.
Yeah, and make sure right now that you're thinking about pulling out your drill if you haven't used it yet this year. Pulling out your drill, looking over your drill, and if anything needs repaired on it, making sure it works, because I know in my area, a lot of the equipment dealerships aren't keeping the supply of parts that they used to keep. So you've got a lag time. So sometimes we're talking a week or so before you can get your parts in to fix anything that needs done. So definitely time to check your planner.
If you need any help vacuuming out the seed box, Justin has volunteered to bring the shop vac and clean that out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, practice makes perfect, right? We were joking before this started that's sometimes my job, and then you can tell who does a good job or not because all the wrong seed gets put in all the wrong plots. But I'm here for a long career, and that gives me plenty of years to practice my vacuuming responsibilities. Most people think fires start with flames, but they don't. Most flames start with heat. Control the heat, control the outcome. That's why Mark Twinoffel with Midwest Ag Risk Control focuses on one question: how fast can you control the heat? Around the farm or in the field, Mark recommends the Enforcer One system with Firebowl foam, built to cool fast, cling to surfaces, and stop reignition. To find out more about this system, call or text Mark at 618-521-6805 or online at enforcer.com.
Are you or your ag-related business interested in becoming a sponsor of the show? Support Penn State Extension's mission to provide trusted, research-based agronomy insights by sponsoring Season 4 of the Agronomy Highlights podcast. Advertising opportunities are available, and you can register directly or take a look at the sponsorship packages and pricing in the link below in the show notes. Feel free to reach out to me directly by emailing rms6953@psu.edu if you have further questions. Now, back to the episode.
So let's look at our next question. And I think this one's open for discussion and argument about maybe this isn't the right time to do this at all. But I think in the same vein of forages and testing soils and getting things prepared, when is the best time to soil sample? We'll start there. And the second part will be, what do I do with this, or what's most important when I get this soil sample back?
I always tell everybody up here in the Northwest, fall is definitely the best time. And if you're sending your sample, and you can send it in anywhere, but if you're sending it into Penn State, they get a lot of samples in the fall, but they get the majority of their samples in the spring. Fall will be a great time for a turnaround time and allows you to prepare. What do you need to get prepared if you're going to put something on in the fall so it's plant available in the spring? Or if you're going to purchase for the spring, you're definitely better prepared that way. So I always encourage fall soil sampling, and it's nice after you take off a harvest too.
Yeah, I'd echo that. There seems to be a brief window where folks might have a little bit of time. I guess this doesn't always apply to forage producers, but after corn and beans come off, maybe before you get a cover crop on, or once the cover crop's in the ground, pull some soil samples. And I think you can sample any time of year when the soil's not frozen or too dry to get the probe as deep as you're supposed to. But being consistent with that from year to year can be valuable as you make your fertility plans and nutrient management plans.
So one of my thoughts, and again, I'm open to you all telling me that is bad idea, Justin. You should not advise people to do that. When I talk to someone and I ask them when the last time was they did a soil fertility test, and they say, "Oh, I don't know, it's been 20 years." My advice is, if the spirit's moving you that day, go outside and take a soil fertility test, right? I think when we talk about fall or spring and crop removal and 3-year schedules, yeah, I think that definitely makes sense. But if you haven't done it and you're thinking about it and you're excited and you're wanting to do this stuff, there isn't a bad time, right? We don't want mud balls, but otherwise get out there and get it, because then we can make a plan today. Well, 7 days from now, probably.
Yeah, preach. I agree.
So what about when you get these back? One of the things that we spend a lot of time doing as agronomists is helping people interpret these samples. And so any advice, like, I know the simple advice is contact your local extension educator, extension agronomist. They'd be happy to look at it with you. But what's kind of the important stuff that you all are looking at when you see this soil test and interpretation to kind of give someone guidance of, hey, this is what you need to be thinking about?
You can get excited and say, here, I need this and I need that and I need this and that. But then when they go to price some of it out, then you're like, oh, what's the most important? So I keep it simple. I start with the lime. That's where we start on ours. If they only get that done, then go from there. That's the very first thing I have them start with.
Yeah, that's a great start. Bang for your buck is certainly going to be lime, especially if there's a legume involved. I think it's a great idea, Erin, as you said, to see what is available, see what the co-ops near you or the suppliers near you have, whether they are able to make custom blends, how big of an acreage you have to have in order to get a custom blend, or if you're going to be dealing on a smaller scale, 50-pound bags of what do you have on hand? So other things like, do they have a fertilizer cart available? What's the process for getting your hands on that and using it before suggesting an exact product or recipe to somebody? I kind of have them do a little bit of legwork. And oftentimes the folks at the co-op or supplier will help them with the math. That seems to be what's intimidating to some people, is there's a little bit of arithmetic that you have to do with your soil test results compared to the actual products you're going to apply. So plenty of help either from your local educator or the person you're purchasing the product from. Probably anything beyond Tractor Supply should be able to help you.
And I think that's a good point, that as people reading soil tests, right? If you're working with your agronomist or someone at a co-op, they know exactly what products they have. It is incredibly challenging, right? When I get a soil test and I'm looking at that with someone and I'm like, well, what do I need to put down? You can read it to them and they're like, well, I can read, right? I know I need 100 pounds of phosphorus and I know I need, but the challenge for us is, because that's not our space, is you kind of have to take a little bit of initiative as the producer to call. Maybe you've only got one person or one entity that's local that can do this for you. Maybe you've got 10 within 15 minutes, right? Like that's also a big challenge of this, is where do you go? But reaching out to them and saying, hey, what fertilizers do you stock, right? Do you have them in bulk? Do you have them in bags? Exactly what Heidi said. How are you going to bring it out here? And then that makes, the interpretation for us or even yourself a lot easier to manage. I think this is kind of a interesting question. And the reason I brought it up is because I was getting it related to more of the fall, late summer seedings, right? And I think that kind of pushes us to this idea of, when should we be putting phosphorus out? When should we be putting out this lime? And we kind of have this thing that lime takes 6 months to activate, right? Well, what if I put it out now? I think there's a lot of questions that come around in the fall to this. And I would encourage you, season 4, episode 7, we have an episode called Back to Basics on soil fertility testing, right? We took about 45 minutes. I think it was Andrew and Ryan and I, and we talked about activation and lime types and calcium carbonate equivalent and all of the things that would go into something like this, how to take soil samples, where to send them. Give that one a listen. And if you still got questions, I think one of the things that always kind of stuck out was a good sample gives good results, right? So learn about some of this stuff, reach out with questions prior to taking the sample, and then follow up after for a little bit more advice. Anything from you, Erin or Heidi?
The last thing on my mind that we didn't mention was, and this is taking us a little bit out of order, but I don't want it to go unsaid, is seeding depth for forages. If you're going to make a mistake, it's going too deep, right? We don't want to be planting this stuff at an inch deep, usually like a 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch. And there's going to be a couple seeds on the soil surface, even if you're going through with a drill. So just be careful, test the seeding depth, get off the tractor, go back behind the drill, get your pocket knife out or your seed depth tester and make sure that you are not wasting your money by burying these things way too.
Excellent point. Yeah. And I think that comes up with rented equipment too, right? Just because someone, maybe you talk to the person that had it before you did and they say, oh, I put down orchard grass. Don't assume everything they did was correct, right? Don't use the same seeding rates. Don't always use, you might, but always verify all that stuff for yourself. Great point, Heidi. All right. Well, we've covered crop conditions. We've answered some questions about fall establishment of forages. We've got some information within our podcast on that. We've talked a little bit about soil fertility. I think this is a good place to wrap up for the day. We appreciate everybody being with us. Erin, Heidi, thank you so much. Dwayne will be with us next time, so we'll make him remember what his report was supposed to be and tell us what went on in August when we visit with him in September. But otherwise, thanks everyone for listening. Have a great day, and we'll catch you next time on the Agronomy Highlights podcast.
See you later.